43 people walked into the Fort Callister Regional Military Selection Office at 9:47 on a Tuesday morning, and not one of them said a word. They came through the main entrance in ones and twos, wearing jeans and fleeces and the kind of ordinary clothes that didn't draw attention anywhere. They filled the lobby first, then the hallway, then the hard plastic chairs along the east wall, and when those were full, they stood. They didn't check their phones. They didn't speak to each other. They just waited, watching the frosted glass partition at the far end of the corridor with the particular quality of attention that is not anxious and not idle, but something else entirely. The attention of people accustomed to waiting without letting the waiting show. Colonel Derek Pryor, who had been coordinator of the Armed Forces Future Leaders Program for 7 years and had never once been surprised by anything that happened in his own building, came out of his office to see what was going on, took one look at the hallway, and went back inside without a word. A few minutes later, a woman walked in from the parking lot, still wearing blue scrubs from a night shift she hadn't bothered to go home and change out of. She was 32, medium height, with the kind of stillness that photographs don't capture well. Not because there was anything remarkable about her face, but because the quality of it was too quiet for a lens to register. She moved through the 43 people the way water moves through a known channel. Without pausing, without looking around, like someone who had already mapped the room before she entered it. Her name was Avery Malone, and 3 hours earlier she had been restocking a crash cart at Millhaven Community Clinic. She had not slept. She walked to Pryor's office and opened the door without knocking. The morning had started the way mornings do when something difficult is already in motion. Quietly, with the particular flatness of a day that has already decided what it's going to be before you're fully awake. Connor Malone got up at 6 because his glucose alarm went off, not because he'd slept past it. He was 16, lean the way teenage boys are when they're still deciding what shape they're going to grow into, with his mother's eyes, careful, watchful, registering more than they gave back. He checked his continuous monitor, recalibrated, ate half a piece of toast standing at the counter, and looked at the folder he'd organized the night before. Printed emails. A program acceptance letter from September. The reversal letter from Colonel Pryor dated 3 weeks later. An appeal form he'd filled out by hand because he couldn't figure out how to submit it online. His mother had worked the overnight shift. She'd be home by 7:30 if the clinic had a quiet close. He left a note on the counter, going in to try again, and then, because he knew she'd read the next line before the first, "I'll call if it goes sideways." Fort Callister Regional Military Selection Office sat at the edge of a business park outside of Stanton, Oregon, the kind of facility that existed in the spaces between more important things, government functional and fluorescent lit, and organized around the assumption that people who came through its doors were there to comply with a process, not contest one. Connor had been here once before, in September, when everything had been straightforward, and the program coordinator had shaken his hand and said he was exactly the kind of applicant they were looking for. That had been before the reversal letter. He signed in at the front desk, was given a paper number, and sat in a plastic chair for 19 minutes before being called back to Pryor's office. Pryor was in his late 50s with the build of a man who had been rigid his entire life and found it agreeable. His desk was organized in a way that suggested the organizing mattered as much as the work. He looked at Connor's folder, looked at Connor, and looked at the folder again. "Malone," he said, "your mother is listed as military dependent guarantor for this application." "Yes, sir." Her service record returns, classified at a tier I can't access through any standard verification system. He said it the way people say things when they've already decided what the saying means. That's a problem. She served in naval intelligence. Some of her record is redacted. Anyone can claim naval intelligence. Pryor leaned back in his chair. Anyone can claim classified. That doesn't make it real. What it makes it is unverifiable, and unverifiable documentation is treated the same as absent documentation in this office. Connor sat very still. The acceptance letter said my application was complete. It did, before our verification team flagged the discrepancy. What discrepancy specifically? Your mother works night shifts at a walk-in clinic. Pryor's voice had a particular flatness to it, the flatness of a man who had given this speech before and found it satisfactory. That's not military service, son. That's a civilian employment record. A civilian employment record does not entitle a dependent to the priority consideration your application claimed. Connor thought about the folder his mother had assembled in September, the careful organization of it, the handwritten tabs, the 2 evenings she'd spent at the kitchen table going through every page. He thought about her saying, "It's all there. Just show them what's there." "The documentation exists," he said. "It's just not something your system can pull directly." Pryor looked at him with the expression of a man deciding whether to be patient and choosing not to be. "I have processed over 300 applications in this district. I know what legitimate classified service looks like when it comes through proper channels, and I know what it looks like when someone fills in a blank on a form with something they believe will be difficult to disprove." He picked up a pen. "I'm initiating a formal fraud review of this application. Your program enrollment is suspended pending investigation." "My insulin supplies cost $460 a month without the program's medical coverage," Connor said. He hadn't planned to say it. It came out anyway. Pryor didn't blink. "That is not something this office has jurisdiction over." The phrase settled into the room the way certain things settle. Not loudly, but with a weight that didn't move. "That is not something this office has jurisdiction over." $460 a month, and this man had said it without blinking. "Can I call her?" Connor asked. "You can do whatever you'd like while you wait. You're not under any obligation to stay." Pryor stood and moved toward the door, but the flag goes on the record regardless. Avery answered on the first ring. She had been home for 11 minutes, still in her scrubs, standing at the kitchen counter reading his note when the phone went off. She heard the careful register of Connor's voice. He had her habit of compressing everything into tone rather than words, and she understood immediately what had happened and approximately how bad it was. "Tell me exactly what he said," she said. He told her. She asked 2 questions, specific ones about what documentation Pryor had cited and whether he'd put anything in writing yet. Then she said, "Stay there. I have some things to handle first." He didn't ask what things. He had learned, not by being told, but in the way children learn the shape of things that are never quite explained, that his mother's "I have some things to handle" was not a deferral. It was a description. In the 91 minutes between that call and walking through Pryor's door, Avery made 7 phone calls. Not to the selection office, not to any public number. To people she had worked alongside for years in positions built on a specific kind of trust, the kind that accumulates in difficult places under conditions most people don't encounter. She kept each call brief. She said where she was, what had happened, what she needed. 4 of them had already heard through their own channels before she called, which told her something about how closely certain people had been paying attention. She did not change out of her scrubs. She drove directly to Fort Callister. By the time she arrived, 43 people were already there. Pryor's office was smaller than it looked from the hallway, designed to make a coordinator feel consequential and applicants feel the weight of process. Avery sat down across from his desk without being invited, and the effect of her sitting was somehow more authoritative than his standing. "Ms. Malone," he said, adjusting the honorific after she corrected him without heat. "Your database reflects what your clearance level allows you to access." She said it with the matter-of-fact quality of explaining why a key doesn't fit a particular lock. No performance, no edge, just the architecture of how the system worked. "My record isn't incomplete. Your view of it is." With respect, the phrase had weight behind it. That's a claim anyone can make. Avery reached into the pocket of her scrubs and placed a card on his desk. Matte black, no logo, a format that only meant something to people who knew what they were looking at. Pryor stared at it, then at her. "When your phone rings," she said, "answer it." "I'm not going to." The phone on his desk rang. He looked at it for 1 ring, 2, then he picked it up. He listened for 41 seconds. Avery watched the color change in his face the way weather changes, not all at once, just one pressure system replacing another with quiet efficiency. His free hand, resting on the sextant in the easy posture of a man accustomed to holding authority, went flat against the surface and didn't move. He said, "Yes, ma'am," 3 times. The third time, the volume had dropped by nearly half. He put the phone down and looked at the wall to Avery's left, a point 2 feet to the side of her, and stayed there. "Reinstate his application," Avery said. "Remove the fraud flag from his record. Process the full enrollment with the medical coverage tier he qualified for." She let a moment pass, and a formal written apology. "He came in here alone, and you called his family's documentation fraudulent in front of a witness. He's 16 years old, and his medication costs $460 a month without this coverage." She looked at Pryor directly. "That part goes in the letter." Pryor turned to his computer. Through the glass partition, Connor watched his mother sit perfectly still while the man who had told him that wasn't something this office had jurisdiction over began typing. It took 17 minutes. Pryor printed the reinstatement confirmation, the fraud flag removal, and a formal letter on office letterhead that used the words "improper handling" and "unconditional reinstatement," and "we deeply regret the distress caused to you and your family." He signed it with the mechanical quality of someone who understood that the signing was not optional. He looked at Connor when he set the envelope on the edge of the desk. "I misjudged your application." He stopped. "Tried again. I misjudged it because I made an assumption about your family's background, and the assumption was entirely wrong." He was actually looking at Connor now, not at the folder, not at the desk, with the expression of a man who was only just now seeing what he'd been talking to. "What I said about the medical costs," he stopped again. "That was wrong. I'm sorry." Connor didn't tell him it was fine. He nodded once and picked up the envelope. In the hallway, the 43 people were already moving, with the quiet efficiency of a unit that had registered a change in status. No signal, no announcement. Just the collective shift of people who had come for a reason and understood that the reason had been addressed. A few of them looked at Avery as she came through the door. She met their eyes the way she met the eyes of people she'd been in difficult places with, not warmly exactly, but with recognition. Outside, the Oregon coast air hit them. Salt, low cloud, the particular cold of a late October morning that carries the ocean in it even 3 miles inland. Connor stood on the steps and looked at the parking lot, at the cars belonging to 43 people who had arrived before his mother and waited without speaking. "How many did you call?" he asked. 7, she said. "The others came because someone in the network called them." That's what happens when you've served alongside people long enough. You don't have to ask for everything individually. He was quiet for a moment. "How long did you serve?" 8 years. He'd known, in the peripheral way, children know things that aren't named for them. The 3 deadbolts every night. The way she always sat with her back to the wall in restaurants. The car check every single time, even in their own driveway, even when they'd been home all day. He'd cataloged all of it under "that's just how she is," because the alternative required a door he hadn't known how to open. "The clinic is real?" he asked. "The clinic is real. I like the work." She said it without apology or performance. "I'm good at keeping people alive." He believed that. That evening, she made dinner and they ate, and then she talked. "Not everything," she said that clearly at the start. "There are things I can't tell you, not won't, but can't, and the classification doesn't stop mattering because we're sitting in our own kitchen." But she told him more than she had in 16 years combined. 8 years in naval intelligence. The first 3 conventional, the last 5 in work she described in geography and duration, but not operational specifics. Pacific theater assignments, 2 extended deployments he could now mentally match to months that had felt off balance when he was small. A clearance level that explained exactly why Pryor's system had returned empty when he'd tried to pull her record. Connor asked about the car checks, the locks, the way she always knew where the exits were in any room before she looked at anything else, which he'd first noticed when he was 8 and had assumed for years was just a personality trait. "Habit," she said. "When you practice something long enough in a context where it keeps you alive, the body doesn't stop doing it when the context changes." "Does it bother you, still doing it?" She thought about it. "Not anymore. It just is." He looked at her hands on the table, hands he'd watched start IVs and mix medications and help him with chemistry homework and make exactly the same dinner on every third Wednesday because she liked the routine of it. "You knew before I went in today," he said. "You knew Pryor was probably going to do this." "I knew there was a probability," she said. "My record trips verification queries that can't resolve through standard channels. It's happened before. I filed an expedited contact notification before you left, so when Priyamatra initiated the flag, it went to a desk that knew to route it to me directly." "You planned for it." "I planned for the possibility. I've learned not to assume things will go smoothly just because they should." He turned that over. "You could have made one call and sorted this before I got there." She looked at him steadily. "Yes." "Why didn't you?" She turned her coffee mug in her hands, the way she did when she was being precise rather than evasive. "Because one quiet call and a private fix doesn't help whoever Pryor does this to next. It doesn't find out whether he's done it before. It doesn't create a record that something went wrong and that someone was held accountable." She set the mug down. "Quiet resolution is a trap that looks like peace. You get what you came for, and you leave, and the thing that was wrong stays wrong for the next person who walks in." Connor thought about Pryor's face when he'd said $460 is not something this office has jurisdiction over. The particular blankness of it, the practiced quality, like he'd said it before and would say it again. "You filed the complaint before you even left the parking lot," he said. "I saw you on your phone." The moment he signed the reinstatement, "I had sufficient documentation. That letter made the complaint complete." She met his eyes. "He called you a fraud, Connor, in front of a witness. When you were 16 and your medical coverage was on the line, that doesn't get handled quietly." The review began within 48 hours. What it found, over the following 12 days, Pryor had flagged 11 other applications over the past 2.5 years, all from students whose parents had classified service records that couldn't be verified through standard channels. In each case, the application had been stalled, reversed, or quietly declined on procedural grounds. In 4 cases, the families had simply stopped reapplying, assuming the problem was with their own paperwork. The oversight office sent Avery the summary. She read through it twice and sat with the list of names for a long time. One of them was a girl named Brianna Tuck, now 20, who had been 2 weeks from starting the program when her enrollment was reversed 3 years ago. She'd filed an appeal. The appeal had disappeared into a review queue. She'd eventually taken a different road. Community college, a part-time job, a life that was genuinely good, but that she had arrived at by a route that hadn't been her first choice. Avery found her number through the case file and called. Brianna answered on the 3rd ring. "I don't know if anyone's reached out to you yet," Avery said, "but there's a review underway of the selection process in this district, and your case from 3 years ago is part of it. The investigative officer says there may be retroactive remediation options." A long pause. "I thought I'd done something wrong," Brianna said. "I went through every piece of my application. I couldn't find what I'd done wrong." "You didn't do anything wrong," Avery said. "The process failed, not you." Another pause. "Why are you calling me? Who are you?" "My son's case opened the review," Avery said. "I thought you should know yours was in it." Brianna didn't say much more, but before she hung up, "Thank you. I've needed someone to say that for a long time." Avery sat with the phone in her hand for a while after the call ended. The formal findings came 3 weeks later, all 12 cases substantiated. Pryor's coordinating authority suspended pending a mandatory conduct review, a district-wide audit of selection decisions going back 5 years, with an independent panel to assess additional cases. Connor was already active in the program. His first weekend intensive was in January. His glucose numbers had leveled out in the weeks since, which his endocrinologist attributed to reduced stress. A diagnosis Connor found both accurate and slightly irritating to acknowledge. He was at the kitchen table working through a history assignment when his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He held it up for his mother. She looked at it for slightly longer than a casual glance. "Answer it," she said. The voice on the other end was young, slightly unsteady in the way voices get when someone has been working up to a call. Is this Connor Malone? My name is Brianna Tuck. I know your mom called me a few weeks ago, and I looked up the case and found your name in the filing. A breath. The review board called me this morning. They're reinstating my eligibility. 3 years retroactive. I can reapply. Another breath, quieter this time. I just needed to tell someone. Connor looked across the table at his mother. She was watching him with the careful attention of someone who already knew the shape of what was being said. That's really good, he said. I'm genuinely glad. He set the phone down. 12 cases, he said. 12 found so far. The 5-year audit may surface more. He looked at the table. At the folder, still sitting there with the reinstatement letter inside it. 3 weeks old now, doing different work than it had been. He thought about Brianna Tuck's voice. The specific sound of 3 years being accounted for by someone who'd been carrying them alone. Mom, he said. She waited. I've spent a long time thinking you were just careful, he said. As a personality, the locks in the car and the way you always sit facing the door. He stopped, restarted. I didn't understand it was a different kind of careful. She was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, the words had the texture of something that had been held a long time. I thought I was protecting you by keeping it separate. Who I was before the clinic, the work I did, I thought the cleanest thing I could give you was a life without any of that in it. She looked at her hands on the table. But you grew up careful anyway. You learned to read rooms and check your own documents twice, and you don't trust things to be easy just because they should be. I gave you the vigilance without the context. That wasn't fair to you. Connor was quiet. The October rain had started against the window, the particular light, persistent rain of coastal Oregon evenings. You came home every time, he said. I did. A pause. Was that always certain? She met his eyes. Not always. No. The kitchen held that for a moment. Okay, he said, and then quietly, I'm glad you did. She looked at him with the expression of someone who has been carrying something heavy for a long time and has just been told they can set part of it down. So am I, she said, every single time. She got up and poured the last of her cold coffee down the drain and rinsed the mug. Connor went back to his history assignment. The rain continued against the glass. In the hallway, the 3 deadbolts on the front door were engaged the way they always were. Habit, history, the specific shape of a life that had been consequential in ways he was only beginning to have the vocabulary for. He thought about 43 people in ordinary clothes, standing in a government hallway without speaking. He thought about what it meant that they had come, not because of protocol, not because they were summoned formally, but because someone had called and they had understood the call and gotten in their cars. He thought about Brianna Tuck, who had believed for 3 years that the failure was hers. He thought about the reinstatement letter in the folder and the formal apology with $460 in it because his mother had made sure those words were written down somewhere that would exist past today. He thought about his mother at the kitchen sink, completely ordinary, rinsing a mug in a house in Stanton, Oregon, on a rainy Tuesday evening, and how large the distance was between how that looked and what it actually was. It was not a small distance. But they were sitting at the same table now, finally, with nothing between them that the other one wasn't beginning to know, and the locked rooms she hadn't opened yet would wait. There was time for them. There was at last time for all of it.